Hey guys, this is Clinton Jeff from UnleashThePhones.com and this is my review of the Xiaomi Mi4i. It's kind of hard to imagine that Xiaomi only entered India 1 year ago, because boy have they changed the mobile scene here. No other company does value for money as well as Xiaomi. From the Xiaomi Mi Pad to the Xiaomi Redmi 2, they've been pumping out some products that are incredible bang for the buck, including their own flagship, the Xiaomi Mi 4. So it was very interesting when Xiaomi announced a new flagship product called the Xiaomi Mi 4i right here in India last week. While I feel like calling it a flagship is a bit too much, the Mi 4 does offer some very impressive specs for the price tag. But at the same price tag, there are also a couple equally compelling smartphones around. Here's what I think about the Xiaomi Mi 4i. Alright, let's start with design. Unlike the regular Mi 4, the Xiaomi Mi 4i is made out of a single piece of very durable polycarbonate. So instead of the chamfered edges are very soft squared edges and a soft touch matte finish that apparently has an anti-grease coating. The finish on the unibody is actually really nice, and that anti-grease coating can also resist stains and fingerprints. In fact, Xiaomi even has a video where they wrote on this back panel with a permanent marker and they just rubbed it clean and it was back to normal. All in all, it does not feel like cheap plastic, and that itself is very impressive. I've played with both the matte finish and the glossy finish version of the Mi 4i, and they both felt like a phone that should cost a lot more. This is also because beneath that polycarbonate shell is a tough magnesium alloy support structure, which means that build quality is pretty solid. Personally, I like the glossy versions more, but I got the white version of the Mi 4i to check out. At first, only the white version will be on sale, but then the black version will be released 3 weeks later. This will be followed by other colors which include blue, pink and yellow. Measuring 138 by 69 by 7.8 millimeters and weighing at just 130 grams, the Mi 4i is still slimmer and lighter than the regular Mi 4. And as you can tell from those measurements, it's very easy and comfortable to use one-handed. The rounded corners and that nice soft touch finish definitely make it more comfortable to use. Xiaomi stressed that they opted to make a more pocketable, user-friendly size device instead of going with something huge, and this is much appreciated. In fact, my thumb can get to almost every single corner of that screen except diagonally. Speaking of which, at the front of the Mi 4i is a 5-inch 1080p resolution IPS LCD display made by either Sharp or JDI. The glass itself is a fully laminated Corning Concord OGS glass, and the OGS aka One Glass solution means that there's no air gap between the touchscreen and the display. This means that the display itself looks a lot clearer and the touch response is also much better. It's pretty sharp and can get very bright. It can also get really dim, so it won't blind you when you're using it in a dark situation like at the theater while watching a movie or something. Xiaomi has used a way better quality screen this time around, so the Mi 4i display actually has much deeper blacks than the LCD screen on the regular Mi 4. The company is also using a new sunlight display technology that dynamically brightens certain parts of the display and adjusts the tones of whatever is on screen to get a more legible, balanced display in bright sunlight. Xiaomi's sunlight display technology actually works really well, and the Mi 4i was very easily usable even in outdoor sunny environments. That being said, the color temperature of the display is slightly off, so while colors might appear very saturated, there's a very slight bluish purplish tint to that display. That being said, viewing angles are actually fantastic for an LCD display. Moving on to the rest of the phone, above the display you'll find the centrally located earpiece with a 5 megapixel front facing camera and an LED notification light on the right side of it. There's also an ambient light sensor and a proximity sensor hidden somewhere around here. Below the display you'll find the usual Android capacitive touch keys for recent apps, home and back. These keys are also very thankfully backlit. On the left side of the Mi 4i you will find just the SIM card slot. Unfortunately, the Mi 4i has no micro SD card slot, but it is a dual SIM device and both SIM card slots have support for Indian LTE bands. Moving to the right side you'll find the metal power and screen lock button. These work pretty well and are easy enough to get to. At the top of the Mi 4i you'll find just the lone 3.5mm headphone jack, while at the bottom you'll just find the micro USB charging port and a tiny pinhole for the main microphone. Coming to the back of the Mi 4i you'll find the camera lens at the back with the dual tone dual LED flash at the side and a tiny pinhole for the secondary noise cancelling microphone. Towards the bottom you'll find the Mi branding once again with a couple regulatory symbols below it. You'll also find the speaker grill that is made out of 114 micro drilled holes. The location of the speaker grill means that it does get very muffled when you leave the Mi 4i on a flat surface. This is definitely a problem because it means you might miss a couple phone calls if you place it flat on your desk. I should mention that the polycarbonate body is not removable, but Xiaomi is selling some very cool clip-on cases in a whole bunch of fun colors. So even if you do end up with a boring color of the Mi 4i, you can always add a little bit more personality to it. All in all, the design of the Xiaomi Mi 4i looks nice enough. The most obvious comparison would be to say that it looks like the iPhone 5C, which it kinda does, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this is a somewhat attractive smartphone that feels very solid in terms of build quality. Alright, let's move on to hardware. The Xiaomi Mi 4i is powered by an octa-core 2nd generation Snapdragon 615 64-bit processor. This apparently was designed by Qualcomm India and does not have the heating issues that plagued the 1st generation 615. The 2nd generation Snapdragon 615 features 4 high-performance cores clocked at 1.7 GHz and 4 power-saving cores clocked at a more conservative 1.1 GHz. As you can probably tell, the performance cores are used for very processor-intensive apps or games, while the power-saving cores are used for lightweight apps or just menial tasks. There's also 2 GB of RAM, an Adreno 405 GPU, and 16 GB of internal memory. Out of that 16 GB of internal memory, only about 11 GB is actually available to use. Because the Mi 4i does not have a microSD card slot, this might be a deal breaker for some of y'all, but if space is not an issue for you, this should be manageable. Hopefully Xiaomi will release a 64 GB version of the Mi 4i as well. But just to help you manage your memory, there is also USB on the go support. In terms of performance, the Xiaomi Mi 4i isn't really a slouch at all, and generally navigation was smooth and lag-free. Graphic intensive games like Asphalt 8 played just fine, though there were some frame drops during very intense moments. That being said, there are occasional moments where the Mi 4i can get a little bit sluggish. I say this because even the regular Mi 4 was kind of sluggish when it first released, but a firmware update totally fixed those issues. I should also note that like the regular Mi 4, the Mi 4i has 2 performance modes available. By default, it's in a balanced mode, and there's also a performance mode. As you can tell from the name, the balanced mode is more conservative and caps the maximum clock speed of the processor cores so as to conserve battery life. Then there's the performance mode, which basically frees up the processor to do whatever it wants. But unlike the regular Mi 4, the Mi 4i benchmarks are not drastically different in either of these modes. Speaking of which, in case you're a big fan of benchmarks, I do have a whole bunch of benchmark results right over at UnleashThePhones.com that you can check out. Moving on, in terms of connectivity, there's Bluetooth 4.1, Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi Direct, there's GPS and FM radio, and there's even support for USB on the go. As I mentioned earlier, this is a dual SIM, dual standby device, and both SIM card slots have support for LTE bands here in India. Honestly, the only thing that's missing is NFC and infrared. Alright, let's talk about software. Xiaomi initially started out making software, not hardware. Their first product was MIUI, which is a very popular custom Android skin that is available for a whole bunch of phones out there. As such, the Xiaomi Mi 4i runs MIUI 6, but it's the first Xiaomi phone to run MIUI 6 based on Android 5.0 Lollipop. And since it runs Lollipop, it makes full use of that 64-bit processor. MIUI is lightweight and filled with features, and even though it's very inspired by Apple's iOS, it is one of the better executed Android skins currently available. Everything is very well done and beautiful, from the various animations that you come across when navigating around the UI to the onboard apps such as the compass, calculator, or even the clock. There's emphasis on both features and design. Of course, the first thing you'll notice about MIUI is the complete lack of any app drawer. Just like other Chinese OEMs, there is no separate list of apps. Instead, all of your apps and widgets are laid across a collection of home screen panels. Apart from that, it's very similar to other Android skins with a drop-down notification panel that is smart enough to know when you need to get to the toggles or when you need to get to the notifications. For example, if you have a new message or a WhatsApp notification, it'll show you the notification panel. But in case you don't have any new notifications, it will show you the toggles instead. But MIUI is really well known for its themes, and there's a fun little themes app that's pre-installed that gives you access to a whole bunch of themes on their store. Personally, I think MIUI is pretty enough by itself, but in case you want to change things up, there is a whole bunch of themes out there. But as you can guess, themes are just one part of how customizable MIUI is. You have the ability to customize what each button does on short press or long press, or to toggle what notifications to see, what notification icons to see. You can even choose what kind of battery indicator to see, or even the colors of the notification LED up top. There's even a do not disturb mode and the ability to unlock your phone whenever a Bluetooth device is connected to it. Moving on, messaging is easy enough thanks to that large screen. The Mi 4i comes with SwiftKey, Flexi, and even the Google keyboard pre-installed. So right right out of the box, there's a great typing experience. In terms of web browsing, it is very interesting to see that Xiaomi has their own web browser, but there's also Google Chrome pre-installed, which I personally prefer. The Snapdragon 615 processor can load up most web pages without any struggles, but very heavy websites can take a slight bit of time to render. Coming to multimedia, MIUI has their own skinned versions of the gallery, video and music player apps, but they're pretty much your usual stock Android multimedia apps. The onboard video player is pretty good and can play back all kinds of file formats, but the music player is pretty much what you'd expect and also has built-in lyric support. Music quality out of the Mi4i via headphones was pretty okay, but that loudspeaker at the back can actually get pretty loud. In fact, the Mi4i apparently has Xiaomi's smart PA technology, which apparently amplifies sound and improves playback quality but protects the speakers from damage at high volume levels. But as I mentioned earlier, that speaker does tend to get muffled if you place it on a flat surface. Alrighty, let's talk about that camera. The Xiaomi Mi4i boasts a 30 megapixel rear camera with a 5-element f2.0 aperture lens, an intelligent two-tone flash, and a camera sensor that is made by either Sony or Samsung. As if that wasn't enough, at the front there's a 5 megapixel 80-degree wide-angle front-facing camera with a f1.8 aperture. In terms of software, the MIUI camera app has a lot of functionality with a very easy to understand interface. You can swipe left or right to get through the various filters or shooting modes respectively, and there's plenty of shooting modes available, including a panorama mode, a timer mode, there's a manual mode which gives you more control of the camera, there's also a refocus mode where you can take a picture and then focus later, there's also a beautify mode for selfies and a night mode for low light pictures. As you'd expect, it's also very easy to get to an HDR mode, and when you switch over to video mode, you also have the ability to record slow motion video or fast motion video, but by default continuous autofocus is switched off in video, so unless you like touch to focus in video, you'll want to go enable that. The Mi4i also records in 720p resolution by default, but can also record in full 1080p HD as well. In terms of image quality, it was pretty good overall, and daytime images looked natural and had proper exposure with plenty of detail in each shot. Images generally tend to look very sharp and pretty great for a phone in this price range. That being said, pictures taken indoors are pretty okay, both in terms of exposure and color reproduction. You'll have to be careful to hold the phone very still in low light situations or you'll get some very shaky shots. Images taken in nighttime situations had a little bit of noise creep in, but it still performed very well for a phone in this price range. I should also note that the HDR mode on the Mi4i does a great job of taking some very pleasant, extremely dynamic pictures in all sorts of situations. Some of y'all might like the HDR mode, while some of y'all might hate the artificial look. Regardless, I think Xiaomi does a better job at HDR than any other Android OEM. The dual tone, dual LED flash at the back intelligently calculates the amount of cool whites and warm yellows to mix and emit when the flash goes off, and it seems to do a pretty good job for portrait shots of friends in low light situations. The front facing camera is also great for selfies and produces images that have lots of exposure and accurate color reproduction, but I still feel like there's room for improvement with it. Video quality on the Xiaomi Mi4i was pretty okay. It's not as fluid as the video quality on the regular Mi4, which I think has better cameras overall, but it was still detailed enough without any underexposure. As always guys, I have a whole bunch of high resolution camera samples right over at UnleashThePhones.com, just in case you want to see how good the Mi4i camera actually was. Alright, let's talk about call quality. Call quality on the Mi4i was pretty good thanks to the onboard noise cancelling. Callers on the other end said that they could hear my voice loud and clear, and the phone managed to block out a lot of background sounds. As I mentioned earlier, the loudspeaker at the back can get really loud, but don't place it on any flat surfaces because it'll get muffled. Alrighty, let's talk about battery life. The Xiaomi Mi4i is powered by a 3120 mAh battery, which is larger than the 3080 mAh battery on the Mi4. The Mi4i also supports quick charging 2.0, which means that if you use the charger that it comes with, you'll be able to charge the phone from 0 to 40% in just 1 hour. That being said, it'll still take about 3 hours to go from 0 to 100% battery. Officially, Xiaomi rates the battery life of the Mi4i at 11 hours of HD video playback or 35 hours of talk time with 3G on. That's pretty accurate but still slightly generous. In the default balanced mode, I was able to get about 9 hours of continuous video playback out of the Mi4i with the screen on medium brightness. Now that might not be as impressive as the insane battery life of the Xperia Z3, but with the Xiaomi Mi4i you'll definitely be able to get back home at the end of a workday with some battery percentage left. In fact, battery life was slightly better than the regular Mi4. But that being said, you'd still probably want to charge this thing up every night. Alrighty, so to conclude, reviewed. At the price that it's selling here in India, it is kind of tough to find faults with the Xiaomi Mi4i, especially when other similarly spec'd smartphones are priced much higher. In fact, the only real competition in the same price range is the Honor 4X, the Moto G and the U Eureka, but the Mi4i has a higher resolution screen and a better camera than all three of these phones. The U Eureka has a slight advantage because it is much cheaper, but in its own price range it has tough competition from Xiaomi's own Redmi 2. But that being said, with the Xiaomi Mi4i, there's really no reason why you'd want to get the Moto G. There's also the 2GB version of the Asus Zenfone 2. That phone has a similar price tag and similar specs, except for the fact that they chose an Intel processor instead of a Snapdragon processor. Just like the Mi4i, it also is on Android Lollipop, but the Zenfone 2 does have a microSD card slot. Overall, it's the closest competitor to the Xiaomi Mi4i, but they both have their own pros and cons. At the end of the day, the Xiaomi Mi4i is just plain and simple great value for money. While there are definitely one or two equally compelling smartphones around the same price range, as an all-around package, the Mi4i definitely stands out. While I'm not 100% behind Xiaomi calling this phone a flagship, with the Mi4i you get an Android Lollipop smartphone with a great screen, a good camera, decent performance and solid build quality. Heck, even battery life isn't too bad at all. All of this at a somewhat affordable price tag. If you do end up picking the Xiaomi Mi4i, chances are you're probably going to be very happy with it. Alright guys, so that's what I think about the Xiaomi Mi4i. As always, if you guys have any questions about this phone, let me know right in the comment section below, or check out the written review right over at UnleashThePhones.com. And hey, if this review video was helpful for you, maybe hit that like button or maybe subscribe, because that would be appreciated. And that's about it. Thanks for watching guys.